Hello and welcome to this special edition of our Omni Talk Spotlight series, where we are bringing you interviews with our top 20 OmniStars for 2022. The award was developed in partnership with Quorso to recognize the top omnichannel operators based on the headlines and the work they are driving within their respective organizations. I am Chris Walton.
And I'm Anne Mezzenga.
And we are pleased to welcome to the show today, Allison Peterson, the EVP and Chief Customer Officer for Best Buy. Allison, how does it feel to be named one of the top 20 OmniStars for 2022?
Well, I was incredibly flattered and very humbled. Thank you.
Well deserved, I have to say. We've been following your work for quite a long time. Not just because you're in our wonderful home state of Minnesota, but also because of the strides that Best Buy has made through what have been probably the most challenging years in retail the last couple of years.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that's really well said, Anne. And we've been wanting to get you on the show for a while. So now we're finally doing it. So thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I have to say, as well, I am obviously representing the work of so many people to bring it to life. So I view the award as an award to all of us.
Awesome. And at the end, we're going to ask you to pay it forward too. So yes, wait for
tuned.
that,
Yes.
loyal Omni Talk listeners.
Well, Allison, before we get started, we want to give a special shout out to our partners at Quorso, without whose support OmniStars would not have been possible. Quorso is a tool your field leaders will actually thank you for. It turns all of their reports into personalized top priorities, then helps them take the right actions to boost performance. Learn how leaders at over 25,000 US stores are saving time and driving impact at Quorso.com. Okay, Allison, before we get into this, I want to know a little bit about you. Let's start with you and your background, your career. Fill us in.
Well, it's a long one. It's always in retail. I'll try not to date myself too terribly. I guess I would say I've always been in customer facing roles, truly trying to drive change. So you could say I've been following the customer around. I'd like to think I've been hopefully not always following, but that's a little bit of kind of the consistent thread of my background. I started actually as a merchant with Dayton Hudson Corporation, working for, I know, a company you both know very well, Target, and kind of grew up in the merchandising ranks there. And then came over to Best Buy, what will be almost 18 years ago this fall, which is hard to believe.
Wow.
And really started with the company when e-commerce represented 2% of their total revenue, or our total revenue. And so it was at a completely different maturity, as you can imagine. And so I joined Best Buy in kind of a merchant marketing hybrid role.
Okay.
And spent several years in e-commerce here, kind of helping build out the channel. And then decided that I really wanted to help advance digital on behalf of Best Buy. And one of the ways I knew that I could do that was from the marketing seat, and really transforming our marketing spend from analog to digital. And with that, working with all of our vendor partners to transform the way they thought about spending our co-op dollars together. And so I had about an 8-year run in marketing in different types of jobs in both category marketing and brand marketing, and then was asked to come back to lead e-commerce, kind of back to my roots, to be able to kind of continue to drive that digital transformation forward. And then over the course of time, it evolved from leading e-commerce to then leading marketing as well as e-commerce. And then at the same time, we were building a little budding CX practice on the side. And then once the pandemic hit, our CEO, Corey Berry, asked that I step into this new role of Chief Customer Officer and start what we refer to as the customer office.
Now, I want to know a little bit about that role, Allison, because we hear it all the time at every single trade show.
Oh my gosh, yes.
We're asked, everybody says, the customer is at the heart of our business, and we look at the customer to make our decisions. But why do you think that Corey and retailers like Best Buy feel like we need an executive in a customer role right now? Like, what is your role involved that kind of answers that question?
Yeah, I think, when the pandemic hit, it became very, very obvious that we were going to need to put it, it's ironic that you should say at the heart of our decisions, because that is literally the vision and the objective of our team, which is to put the customer and the employee at the heart of everything we do. And in that time of crisis, it became clear than ever that we had to prioritize those two things. And there was actually kind of three guiding principles we had in the pandemic, and keeping our customer and employees safe and being completely focused on them was one of those. And so I think the timing was just incredibly important. And there was also this idea of moving the company from what we call customer aware to customer obsessed. And we purposely picked the word obsessed because it can be a little crazy, and it's exactly how we meant it, which is being aware or constantly thinking about the customer are two different things. And so it was really an act in trying to move our customer to kind of contemplate or move our culture to contemplate the customer and the employee at the heart of everything we do, and really be the tip of the spear of like all of our strategy. And so that was really the inception.
And what does your role look like then? I mean, are you bridging a couple of different teams to make that happen? You talk about, I love that you talk about employees as customers, as well, like they're held to the same standard. But what does that look like for you and the day-to-day and the teams you oversee?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think what I've learned from my peers who have the same title is that our roles and our remits all look a little bit different. I think we're all learning what's the right combination of functions to really bring what we're talking about to life. So if you think about what I own, right now I oversee enterprise strategy, customer experience, research and insights, our marketing efforts, and then our membership propositions.
Wow.
That's interesting too. And like, especially, I love that we start with your background too, because your background as of late has been much more, it sounds like, heavily digitally focused. But now in this new role, as you just alluded to, there's probably a lot of thinking where you have to bridge those divides, which is what being an OmniStar, quite honestly, is all about. And it's also why we partnered with Quorso the way we did, because they're very focused on the store side of making things as efficient as possible. So my question for you next would be like, how do you think about that role specifically as a chief customer officer and bringing innovation to market, or being customer obsessed, as you said, particularly as you look at, physical store innovation versus, say, digital only innovation? How do you sort through all of that?
Sure. I think the way I approach it is the idea of continually listening to our consumers, really anticipating their needs, and then iterating is really table stakes to any sort of innovation you'd ever bring to market. And so for us, the goal is to really meet our customer kind of where they want to be met, whether that's in our stores or online or through our app or in their home. And what's most critical from our perspective is that when we do that, we truly make that experience seamless. And so that's kind of at the crux of everything that we try to focus on. And we also know that, consumer behavior has massively changed in the pandemic, but those behaviors are here to stay. And so we need to keep evolving our business model to keep pace and hopefully get in front of their evolving needs.
Yeah, and the other point you mentioned too, and I thought, Anne, it was great that you picked up on it too. I was thinking the same thing, was the part about the employees as well as the customers. So I'm curious, like, in your role, how do you involve the field leaders or the blue shirts, so to speak, in the execution of what you're trying to do? How do you as a retail organization or as a retail leader incorporate them into the actions you're going to take? What's that process look like?
Well, so I think very early on, as we started talking about customer obsession, we realized that you can't have customer obsession without having employee obsession. And so that's why we really talk about them together. And I do think this is where our company has really led in this space, is the idea of thinking about those two things hand in hand. And so when we talk about some of the feelings we want our customers to feel when experiencing the brand, we want our employees to feel the same way, because otherwise they can't deliver that on behalf of us to the customer. And so we really think about creating the right feedback loops with our associates. And truly, they're the heroes of all of this. They're the ones on the front line. And over the past couple of years, that's been a challenging place to be. And so what we do is we kind of constantly listen and create the right loops so that we're evolving what we're hearing from them about their experience as well as the customer experience. And then we're adjusting to give them the right tools, or if need be, we may even change policy or procedure so that they can really meet the needs of the customer in a meaningful way.
So let me push you on that a little bit, because like Anne said, there's the whole nother level we want to get to this in this conversation too. So can you give us some examples of that? Like, what are some examples of some of the work you and your store teams have done to make sure that the omnichannel shopping experience is as seamless as possible for your customers?
Sure. One of the first examples that comes to mind, which I know you both are familiar with, is our curbside experience and the
Right.
evolution of that over time. You know, really once the pandemic hit and we were deemed an essential business, we essentially pivoted the entire model to curbside
Yeah.
in the span of about 48 hours. And, you know, prior to the
really
yeah,
48
it
hours.
really happened that fast.
Yeah.
Which
You
is
guys were
kind
the
of-
most bold on that too. Like you guys were one of the most bold and ready for that companies out there. I remember
Right.
writing about that for Forbes. Yeah.
And so when you think about that, you know, we were prior to the pandemic, we were testing in about 200 stores, and you can imagine how long it took us to probably think about getting that to 200 stores.
Right.
And then in a time of clarity and crisis, you know, around keeping our employees and our customers safe, we realized that this was the best way to do it. And so we were able to roll this capability to all of our stores and then listened and measured both the customer and the employee experience and continued to iterate on it. And what we found was it was one of those experiences that customers just loved, and they still continue to love it. You know, I always joke that I've worked here a long time, and when we do something really well, you're going to hear about it from your friends and family. We also hear when we do it not so well. But in this instance, when we do it really well, I got more personal calls and emails about the curbside experience that people in my lives had during that time where they needed their technology and wanted to feel safe. And they just thought it was such an excellent experience for kind of what they were trying to accomplish.
That's great. Yeah. I'm curious too. I'm curious what, if you have any other examples too, because like one thing that I wanted to ask you about in advance of this show that I was curious about was total tech. I was wondering if you could talk about like that, because that's again one that bridges the divide. You've got to have the store teams bought in on that. You've got to figure out how to way to sell it to your customers, both probably online and in store. And then you got to deliver on it too. Like that one fascinates me. So I don't know. I'd love to hear about that one as well.
Sure. Well, this one's near and dear to my heart because our
Is
team,
it? Okay.
obviously, our membership team worked very closely on this. But I think one of the most exciting things about Total Tech is it was created by customers, and it
Really? Okay. How
leveraged.
so?
You know, we did so much qualitative and quantitative research around, you know, how do customers want to feel when purchasing technology? And, you know, what we find is there's a lot of stress in purchasing technology, you know, and a lot of people are very focused on getting people into the right products. But what we heard from our customers is, I actually want to make sure I buy the right thing, but then I want to make sure you're with me as I own this technology because it's complex and it's confusing. And so whether something breaks or I need support and I can't have my network up and running, they really said, you know, I just want to feel confident at the end of the day when I buy this technology because it's usually, you know, a pretty meaningful investment for my families. So we created this proposition that really covers what I would say a suite of very differentiated offerings, anywhere from free warranty if something breaks. I mean, that's, you know, free Apple Care when you buy Apple devices.
Right.
It's free Geek Squad support, kind of 24/7. We have a VIP phone and chat dedicated line that if you need support, you can get immediately to someone. And then there's other sorts of benefits too that are really important to customers, like shipping and member pricing. But the intent was to create a program that's so compelling in meeting their needs that why would they ever buy their technology anywhere else?
I think that you started to answer the next question already, Allison. This is Allison's first podcast and she's nailing it. Like
Yeah,
she doesn't
right?
even need to have like, yeah. So you talk about like that being a great example of how you're evolving based on what your customers' expectations are. I'm wondering again, like how you use all of the consumer experience research that you're doing. How do you use what you think the customer is going to want to kind of develop the strategy for the Best Buy business going forward?
Yeah.
How do you kind of think about that?
So I think you're pushing on something that's we know inherently to be true, which is the customer is evolving so quickly and there is so much unknown in everything we're facing that the only way we can continue to iterate our strategy is by just being completely linked to the customer and constantly listening at all levels, paying attention to what's happening in the macro, you know, looking outside of our four, you know, virtual walls, paying deep attention to what our customers and our employees are telling us internally and using all of that. You know, we really have learned the importance of flexibility and a willingness to be able to move and iterate, and that that's the only way we're going to continually meet their expectations. And I think this mindset that change is here to stay, and we need to really get comfortable with it. So this old model of kind of like set it and forget it, it just doesn't exist anymore. You can't really get comfortable in the thing that's working today, because you have to be thinking about how it's going to be working 2 to 3 years from now. And so that's a whole new challenge for management teams. And I think this idea of it not being about the people in the room making the decisions, but letting our customers and employees help us decide by putting their voice into the center of our decision making is just a completely different way about thinking about solving problems.
Yeah, so I want to ask you more about that too, because you brought up something that was always top of mind when Ann and I were working on Store of the Future at Target, which is, you want to be iterative in your approach, right? But then when you start talking about physical retail store operations, where the physical substrate of the store, the architecture of the store is such a fixed and finite thing that it becomes difficult to actually treat the physical store operation with that type of mindset. I'm curious, what advice would you have in relation to that problem, or what are some things you've done within Best Buy that help people overcome that or break free of that barrier to still treat their stores like an iterative petri dish, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a very good question and a hard one. And I think we're still figuring it out ourselves. I think what's interesting is this idea of, bridging the physical and the digital worlds, and what can you learn digitally, because it is so much easier to iterate digitally, and how can you take some of that mindset into thinking as we work on physical formats, whether that's like modularity or thinking about concepts that just have more flexibility in them is kind of the first thing I would say. And then the second thing is, what's really interesting is some of the new technology coming online, like take the metaverse. The metaverse is kind of opening up our whole aperture in terms of being able to reimagine ways you could get insights on physical environments without building them out physically. And so I was with my team on this probably a week or two ago, and our leader of technology, and the use cases in that are just, it feels like endless. And we're all trying to figure out what our role is within the metaverse. But I think that's a whole separate
podcast. 3 of us.
Yeah. That feels like a separate podcast. But I think this
seems
idea,
like a psychology session, actually.
Fair. I think that this idea of how can we iterate without the expense and the time it takes in the physical world, and leveraging digital assets is something that's super interesting. And then we also have some things we brought online with the virtual store over this past year, where we're bringing products into people's homes. We have a virtual store that's essentially merchandised, and we have experts in those virtual stores that are able to bring digital shoppers the expertise of our associates right into their home. And so I think there's other ways that we can continue to iterate like that as it relates to solving some of the physical problem experiences.
Another aspect of it too is actually like the cognitive dissonance in the mind of the store employee as they're dealing with all these iterative changes and approaches at that store level too. How do you guys think about that in terms of making the landing for being involved in what is basically great innovation, essentially, because any innovation for the most part is a good thing to do? How do you keep their minds well focused and well kept under that type of situation, because it is tough. It's tough for the store employees to mine through all that, those issues.
I think that's right. I should share this award and this comment with our leader who runs all of our retail operations, his name is Damian Herman. He's an amazing leader, and he has a very important principle in the way he leads, which is transparency. And I think this idea of being transparent with our associates on what we're trying to do and why, most importantly, really helps them navigate not only the changes that we need to rapidly make in the environments that they're having to manage, but also, how they need to treat our customers. And then they can give us feedback real time. But I do think this idea of just transparency of why you're doing things is something that feels like for us a really big unlock. I think we have retailers, we have a history of what, like, please go do this without
Right.
the why.
Execute
And I
it.
think the why gets a whole different level of ownership. And then because we've created those feedback loops, they can tell us what they think about the why.
Right.
And so creating that dialogue with that transparency in mind is something I think he and his team have done incredibly well. And I think that's how, one of the reasons why, not to mention a really resilient employee base, amazingly talented associates. But that's, I think, at least made it so that they understand the context of which they're operating in.
Right.
Well, Allison, again, you've already, is that your pay it forward? If we were asking you if there's anybody else on the ground who's been instrumental to the work, it sounds like Damien might be that individual, but is there anybody else out there that you'd like to shout out as, really being best in class and delivering for and delighting your customers?
Well, I would say you should know he's a podcast expert, right? So maybe we just teed up one of your next guests, unlike amateur and myself. So maybe I just paid that forward for you and for him. But no, I mean, there's so many people. I think what's really, really strikes me after being in retail my whole career is that this idea of team sport could not be more relevant now. Before you could have really well-run websites and really well-run stores and really well-run, service capabilities, but that's not the customer's expectation. They expect, no matter how they engage with you, for it to just be seamless. Mm-hmm. And that requires a level of partnership and cross-functional teaming that is kind of next level. It's the omni-channel nature of it is right. Has never been more relevant. And it really is like the next iteration of it. And, that's a little bit of what we've tried to optimize for in our structure is bringing, design, both physical and digital together in one team to try to really think systemically. How do we think that way on behalf of the customer? So yes, Damien and our omni-channel team is a huge piece of the success of what we're talking about today. But obviously, we touched around it, the associates and what they bring to our customers on behalf of us every day is I'd like to call them the heroes.
Yeah, right. It's funny too. Like if I read subtly between the lines, you happen to say something that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's something that I agree with too, which is it kind of challenges the convention of the traditional merchant-led retail organization in a lot of ways. That it's far more than the merchants that matter to do retail well. I'm curious. I want to get you out of here on this. We've had you on the hot seat here now for probably about 20 minutes or so. What's the one piece of advice you would give to people